The air in the boutique smelled of cedar and new cotton. But to Daniel, it carried the weight of 1,000 unsaid words. His heart thundered as he glanced at his son, Ethan, standing just a few feet away, holding a flannel shirt up to the light. This moment, this fleeting, stolen moment, was the culmination of years of lies. A fragile chance to mend what he'd broken. Daniel had told his wife, Margaret, he was working late again. Another conference call. Another deadline. Another excuse to slip away. But tonight, there was no office. No email, suddenly this small clothing store in a sleepy coastal town, where he stood with Ethan, his 22-year-old son, who didn't know the truth Daniel had buried for years. The truth that he was proud, so proud, of the man Ethan had become, despite the distance Daniel had built to protect him from a world that wasn't always kind. Think this one suits me? Ethan asked, his voice light but tinged with something searching, as he held the shirt against his chest. His dark hair fell messily over his forehead, and his hazel eyes, Margaret's eyes, sparked with cautious hope. Daniel swallowed, his throat tight. He wanted to say everything, to spill the apologies and confessions he'd rehearsed in his mind for years. But all he managed was a nod. Looks good, kid. Ethan grinned, oblivious to the storm raging in his father's chest. They'd come to this boutique on a whim. A rare evening where Daniel had convinced Ethan to meet him under the guise of catching up. But it wasn't just catching up. It was a reckoning. Daniel had spent years hiding his acceptance of Ethan's identity, his love for his son's truth, because he feared what it would cost them both in their small, conservative town. He'd lied to Margaret, to Ethan, to himself, believing silence was safety. But silence had built walls. And tonight, he wanted to tear them down. The boutique was quiet, save for the soft hum of indie music and the occasional rustle of fabric. Shelves lined with neatly folded sweaters and racks of jeans surrounded them. A cozy cocoon that made the outside world feel far away. Ethan wandered to a rack of jackets, his fingers trailing over leather and denim. And Daniel followed, his hands stuffed in his pockets to hide their trembling. He didn't know how to start, how to bridge the gap of years spent dodging Ethan's questions about his life, his relationships, his heart. You ever miss home? Ethan asked suddenly, his back to Daniel as he inspected a navy blazer. The question caught Daniel off guard, like a hook sinking into his chest. Home. The word conjured images of their old house, with its creaky porch and Margaret's rose garden, where Ethan had grown up before leaving for college. Before he'd come out to Daniel in a tearful, late-night phone call, and Daniel had fumbled the moment, saying too little, fearing too much. Every day, Daniel said, his voice low, but it's not the same without you there. Ethan turned, his expression softening, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. You don't talk about it much. Me being gone. Or anything. Really. The words stung, sharp and true. Daniel wanted to protest, to say he'd thought about Ethan every day. But the lies he'd told Margaret about late nights at work, about why he avoided certain topics, had spilled over into his relationship with Ethan. He'd kept his son at arm's length, not because he didn't love him, but because he didn't know how to love him openly in a town where whispers turned into judgments. I want to change that, Daniel said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. I want you to know me. The real me. Ethan's brow furrowed, and he set the blazer back on the rack. What's that supposed to mean? Daniel's pulse raced. He hadn't planned to say it here, in the middle of a boutique, surrounded by strangers and soft lighting. But the weight of the years, the lies, the missed chances, they pressed against his chest, demanding release. He took a step closer to Ethan, lowering his voice. I haven't been honest. Not with you. Not with your mom. Ethan's eyes widened, a mix of curiosity and caution. Dad, what are you talking about? Daniel hesitated, glancing around the store. A young couple browsed scarves in the corner, and the cashier was busy folding shirts. This wasn't the place. Not yet. But he couldn't back out now. Can we try on some stuff? In there. He nodded toward the fitting rooms at the back. Private and quiet. Ethan looked skeptical but shrugged. Sure. Why not? They grabbed a few items: shirts, jackets, whatever was closest, and headed to the fitting rooms. The small, mirrored space felt like a confessional, the fluorescent lights casting stark shadows. Ethan hung his selections on a hook and turned to Daniel, arms crossed. Okay, Dad. What's going on? You're acting weird. Daniel shut the door behind them, the click echoing in the silence. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might break his ribs. Ethan, he started, his voice barely above a whisper. I've been lying to your mom for years. Not about another woman or anything like that. About how I feel about you. About who you are. Ethan froze, his expression unreadable. What? Daniel's knees felt weak, and before he could stop himself, he sank to the floor, kneeling in front of his son. The words poured out, raw and unfiltered. I'm proud of you, Ethan. I've always been proud. When you told me you're gay, I didn't know how to handle it, not because I didn't accept you, but because I was scared. Scared of what people would say, what it would do to you, to us. So I stayed quiet. I lied to your mom about where I was tonight because I needed this moment with you. To tell you I'm proud. To tell you I love you. Exactly as you are. Ethan's eyes glistened, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The fitting room felt too small for the weight of the words. But Daniel stayed there, on his knees, waiting for his son to respond. Ethan's breath hitched, and he took a step back, his back pressing against the fitting room mirror. The fluorescent light above cast harsh shadows across his face, highlighting the shock in his wide eyes. Dad, you're serious? Daniel nodded, still kneeling, his hands clasped tightly to keep them from shaking. I've never been more serious. Ethan, I've been a coward. I thought keeping quiet would protect you, but all it did was push you away. I'm so sorry. Ethan's lips parted, but no words came. He slid down the mirror until he was sitting on the floor, his knees pulled up, facing his father. The small space felt like it was shrinking, the air thick with years of unspoken truths. You lied to Mom. About this. About me. Daniel's throat burned. Not just about you. About how I felt. About what I wanted to say. She doesn't know I'm here tonight. She thinks I'm at the office, working on some project. But I couldn't keep doing it pretending everything was fine when I hadn't told you the one thing you deserve to hear. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his fingers trembling. I thought you were ashamed of me, he said, his voice cracking. When I came out to you, you barely said anything. You just nodded and changed the subject. I thought you didn't want to deal with it. The words cut deeper than Daniel expected, each one a reminder of his failures. He'd replayed that phone call 1,000 times, Ethan's nervous voice, the way he'd said, Dad, I'm gay, and Daniel's pathetic response, a mumbled okay before asking about his grades. He'd wanted to say more, to tell Ethan he loved him no matter what. But fear had choked him. Fear of their town, their church, their neighbors. Fear of Margaret's reaction, though she'd never given him reason to doubt her love for their son. I was never ashamed, Daniel said, his voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. I was scared. Scared of what people would do to you. Scared I wouldn't know how to protect you. But that's no excuse. I should have been there. Ethan, I should have said it then. Ethan's eyes searched his father's face, looking for something truth. Maybe. Or proof that this wasn't a fleeting moment of guilt. So why now? Why here? In some random store? Daniel let out a shaky laugh, wiping at his eyes. Because I couldn't wait anymore. I saw you last month at your graduation, standing there with your friends. So confident. So, you. And I realized I'd missed so much. I didn't want to miss this, too. Ethan's expression softened, but there was still a guarded edge to it. You could have just called me, Dad, or come to my apartment. Why all the secrecy? Daniel hesitated. How could he explain the weight of their small town, where every glance carried judgment, where Margaret's book club friends whispered about those people over coffee? He'd wanted to shield Ethan from that, but in doing so, he'd shielded him from his own father's love. I didn't trust myself to do it right, he admitted. I needed a place where it was just us. No interruptions, no expectations, just you and me. Ethan leaned his head back against the mirror, staring at the ceiling. You know how hard it was, Dad. Growing up, knowing I was different, and thinking you didn't care. I kept waiting for you to say something. Anything. To make me feel like I wasn't alone. But you were always so distant. Daniel's chest ached. He wanted to reach out, to pull Ethan into a hug. But he stayed still, letting his son's words sink in. I know I messed up. I thought I was protecting you by staying quiet. But I was wrong. I see that now. Ethan's gaze dropped to the floor, his fingers picking at a loose thread on his jeans. Did Mom know about how you felt? Daniel shook his head. I never told her. I didn't want to drag her into my mess until I'd made things right with you. She loves you, Ethan. She's always loved you. But I didn't know how to talk to her about it without admitting I'd been lying to myself for years. Ethan's laugh was bitter. So you lied to both of us. Great. The words stung, but Daniel didn't flinch. He deserved them. I'm here now, he said softly. And I'm not going anywhere. Not until you know how much you mean to me. Ethan looked at him, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. For a moment, they sat in silence, the fitting room a fragile bubble holding their fragile truths. Then Ethan reached for the flannel shirt he'd brought in, holding it up like a shield. You really think this looks good on me? He asked, his voice teasing but shaky. Daniel smiled, relief flooding through him. Yeah, it's perfect. They stood, brushing off the awkwardness, and Ethan slipped into the shirt, checking his reflection. Daniel watched, his heart swelling with a pride he'd kept locked away too long. This was his son, brave, honest, and stronger than he'd ever been. But the night wasn't over, and Daniel knew the hardest part was still ahead, telling Margaret the truth. The fitting room door swung open, and the boutique's warm light spilled back into their world. Ethan adjusted the flannel shirt, stealing glances at himself in a nearby mirror, while Daniel lingered behind, his mind racing. The confession had been a start, but it was only the first step. He still had to face Margaret, to unravel the lies he'd woven into their marriage. But for now, he focused on Ethan, on keeping this fragile connection alive. You hungry? Daniel asked, his voice lighter than he felt. There's a diner down the boardwalk. Best milkshakes in town. Ethan raised an eyebrow, a small smile tugging at his lips. You're bribing me with milkshakes now. Maybe. Daniel shrugged, forcing a grin. Is it working? Ethan laughed, and the sound was a balm to Daniel's frayed nerves. Yeah. Okay. Let's go. They left the boutique, the bell above the door jingling as they stepped onto the boardwalk. The evening air was cool, carrying the salty tang of the ocean and the distant hum of laughter from families and couples strolling by. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of pink and orange. Daniel stole a glance at Ethan, who walked with his hands in his pockets, the flannel shirt still on, its sleeves rolled up. He looked so much like Margaret in that moment, confident, unguarded, alive. The diner was a retro throwback, with red vinyl booths and a jukebox playing old rock tunes. They slid into a booth by the window, and Daniel ordered 2 chocolate milkshakes, remembering how Ethan used to beg for them as a kid. The memory brought a pang of guilt missed so many moments like this, too caught up in his own fears to be the father Ethan needed. So, Ethan said, stirring his milkshake with a straw, what's the plan? You gonna keep sneaking around behind Mom's back? Or are you actually gonna talk to her? Daniel winced. Straight to the point. Just like his son. I'm going to tell her, he said, his voice firm despite the knot in his stomach. Tonight. When I get home. Ethan's eyes widened. Tonight. Like, right after this. Daniel nodded. I've put it off too long. She deserves to know why I've been distant. Why I've been lying. Ethan leaned back, his expression unreadable. You think she'll be mad? Daniel sighed, running a hand over his face. I don't know. Your mom's always been better at this stuff than mellowing without question. You know. But I've kept her in the dark. That's gonna hurt her. Ethan's fingers tightened around his glass. She never said anything to me about, you know, me being gay. She just hugged me when I told her. Said she loved me. But you were the one I was scared to tell. The words hit Daniel like a punch. He'd known Ethan was nervous during that phone call. But hearing it now, in the quiet of the diner, made it real. I'm so sorry, Ethan, he said, his voice thick. I didn't know how to handle it. I thought if I didn't say anything, it'd keep you safe. But I was wrong. Ethan looked down at his milkshake, stirring it slowly. I just wanted you to say you were okay with it. That's all I needed. Daniel reached across the table, hesitating before resting his hand on Ethan's. I'm more than okay with it. I'm proud of you. Not just for who you are, but for how you've handled everything. You're braver than I'll ever be. Ethan's eyes met his, and for the first time that night, Daniel saw something like trust flicker in them. Thanks, Dad, he said softly. That means a lot. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the clink of glasses and the hum of the jukebox filling the space. Daniel felt a weight lift, but another settled in its place. Telling Ethan was one thing. Telling Margaret would be another. She'd always been his anchor, the one who held their family together when he faltered. But he'd betrayed her trust, not with infidelity or malice, but with silence. As they finished their milkshakes, Ethan leaned forward, his voice low. You think Mom'll understand? About why you lied? Daniel exhaled, staring out the window at the darkening boardwalk. I hope so. She loves you more than anything. But I've got to own up to this. No more hiding. Ethan nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. You're doing the right thing. Dad. It's gonna suck. But it's the right thing. Daniel chuckled, the sound tinged with nerves. Yeah. Thanks for the pep talk, kid. They paid the bill and stepped back onto the boardwalk. The night air cooler now, the stars beginning to peek through the sky. Daniel felt a strange mix of dread and hope. He'd crossed one hurdle, but the next one loomed larger. As they walked back to their cars, Ethan bumped his shoulder against Daniel's, a small gesture that felt like forgiveness. Call me tomorrow, Ethan asked, pausing by his car. Let me know how it goes with Mom. Daniel nodded, his throat tight. I will. Promise. Ethan climbed into his car, and Daniel watched him drive away, the taillights fading into the night. He stood there for a moment, the ocean's rhythm steady in the background, and steeled himself for the drive home. For Margaret. For the truth. The drive home was a blur of headlights and quiet roads, each mile bringing Daniel closer to the conversation he'd been dreading for years. The coastal town faded behind him, replaced by the familiar streets of their suburb, where neatly trimmed lawns and glowing porch lights hid the complexities of the lives within. His hands gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, as he rehearsed what he'd say to Margaret. The house was dark when he pulled into the driveway, save for the soft glow of the living room lamp. Margaret was probably reading, her glasses perched on her nose, a cup of tea cooling on the side table. The image was so familiar it hurt, a reminder of the life they'd built together and the secrets he'd kept from her. He unlocked the front door quietly, his heart pounding. The house smelled of lavender and fresh laundry, a comforting contrast to the chaos in his mind. Margaret looked up from the couch, her book open in her lap, her dark hair streaked with silver pulled into a loose bun. "You're home late," she said, her voice warm but tinged with curiosity. "Everything okay?" Daniel set his keys on the counter, his mouth dry. "Maggie, we need to talk." Her brow furrowed, and she closed her book, setting it aside. "What's wrong?" He sat across from her in the armchair, his hands clasped tightly. "I wasn't at work tonight," he said, the words heavy. "I was with Ethan." Margaret's eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt. She leaned forward, her hands folded in her lap, waiting. Daniel took a deep breath, the weight of his confession pressing against his chest. "I've been lying to you. For years. About how I feel about Ethan. About who he is." Her expression shifted, confusion giving way to something sharper. "What do you mean? Lying? Daniel, you're scaring me." He forced himself to meet her gaze, though every instinct screamed to look away. "When Ethan came out to us, I didn't handle it well. Not because I didn't accept him, but because I was afraid. Afraid of what people would say, what it would mean for him, for us. So I kept quiet. I didn't tell you how proud I am of him, how much I love him for who he is. And I lied to you tonight to spend time with him, to tell him that." Margaret's lips parted, and for a moment, she was silent, her eyes searching his face. "You lied to me, to spend time with our son." Daniel nodded, his throat tight. "I didn't know how to talk to you about it. I thought if I kept it to myself, it'd protect everyone. But it didn't. It just hurt him. And you." Margaret leaned back, her hands trembling slightly. "Why didn't you tell me? Did you think I wouldn't understand? That I wouldn't love him just as much?" "No," Daniel said quickly. "I knew you'd love him. You've always been better at that than me. But I was ashamed of my fear. I didn't want you to see it." She stood, pacing the room, her arms crossed. "Daniel, we're supposed to be a team. You don't get to decide what I can handle. You don't get to hide something like this from me." "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "I know I messed up. I'm trying to make it right." Margaret stopped, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Do you know how much it hurt Ethan when you didn't say anything? He thought you didn't care. And now you're telling me you've been carrying this around for years, lying to both of us." Daniel stood, wanting to reach for her, but stopping himself. "I'm sorry, Maggie. I thought I was protecting him, but I was just protecting myself. I was a coward." She shook her head, wiping at her eyes. "You should have trusted me. We could have faced this together." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling between them. Daniel felt the distance he'd created, not just with Ethan, but with Margaret, too. He'd built walls to keep them safe, but all he'd done was isolate himself. "I told Ethan tonight," he said softly, "in a fitting room, of all places. I told him I'm proud of him, that I love him. And I'm telling you now because I don't want to hide anymore." Margaret's expression softened, but the hurt lingered in her eyes. "What did he say?" He was surprised, hurt, at first. "But I think he believes me. I hope he does." She nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "He's a good kid. Better than we deserve. Sometimes." Daniel's chest ached. "Yeah, he is." Margaret sat back down, her hands clasped tightly. "I need time, Daniel, to process this, to figure out how we move forward." He nodded, the weight of her words heavy but fair. "I understand. Whatever you need." She looked at him, her eyes searching for the man she'd married. "Just, no more lies. Okay. No more lies," he promised, his voice barely above a whisper. They sat in silence, the living room lamp casting long shadows across the room. Daniel knew this was only the beginning of repairing what he'd broken, but for the first time in years, He felt a glimmer of hope. He'd told the truth. To Ethan and to Margaret. Now, he had to live it. The next morning, the house was quiet. The kind of quiet that felt like a held breath. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee cooling in his hands, staring at the empty chair where Margaret usually sat. She'd gone for a walk before dawn, something she did when she needed to think. He hadn't slept, the weight of their conversation replaying in his mind, each word a reminder of the trust he'd fractured. His phone buzzed, and Ethan's name lit up the screen. A text. How'd it go with Mom? Daniel's fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure how to summarize the mess he'd made. It was tough. He typed, "She's hurt. But we're talking. You okay?" Ethan's reply came quickly, "Yeah. Thanks for last night. Call me later." Daniel smiled, a small relief amidst the storm. "Will do. Love you, kid." He hit send, the words feeling both foreign and right. He'd said them so rarely, but he meant them now more than ever. When Margaret returned, her cheeks flushed from the morning chill. She didn't meet his eyes. She poured herself a coffee and sat across from him, her silence louder than any words. Daniel waited, giving her the space she'd asked for, though every second felt like an eternity. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady but soft. "I called Ethan this morning." Daniel's heart skipped. "You did?" She nodded, stirring her coffee absently. "I wanted to make sure he was okay. He told me about last night. The fitting room. The milkshakes. He sounded lighter, like he'd been carrying something heavy. And you helped him put it down." Daniel's throat tightened. "I hope so." Margaret's eyes met his, and for the first time since last night, there was a flicker of warmth. "He said you told him you're proud of him, that you love him." "I meant every word," Daniel said, his voice firm. "I should have said it years ago." She nodded, her lips trembling slightly. "I wish you'd told me, too. I could have helped. We could have been there for him together." "I know," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "I was scared. Maggie. Scared of what people would say, what it would mean for him. I thought I was protecting him, but I was just hiding." Margaret reached across the table, her hand resting on his. "You don't get to hide anymore. Not from me. Not from him. We're a family. Daniel. We face things together." He squeezed her hand, tears stinging his eyes. "I'm trying. I promise." She nodded, pulling her hand back to wipe at her own tears. "I'm still mad at you, but I'm glad you told him. He needed to hear it." They sat in silence, the kitchen clock ticking softly in the background. Daniel felt the weight of the years, the lies, but also the possibility of something new. He'd taken the first steps confessing to Ethan, confessing to Margaret. But rebuilding trust would take time, and he was ready to put in the work. That afternoon, Daniel drove to Ethan's apartment, a small studio in the city where he was starting his career as a graphic designer. The building was old but charming, with ivy climbing the brick walls and a buzzing energy that felt like Ethan. When Daniel knocked, Ethan opened the door, his expression a mix of surprise and cautious warmth. "Didn't expect you so soon," Ethan said, stepping aside to let him in. "Wanted to check on you," Daniel said, taking in the cluttered space art supplies scattered on a desk, a couch covered in colorful throw blankets. "Nice place." Ethan shrugged, a shy smile tugging at his lips. "It's home." They sat on the couch, and Daniel felt the awkwardness of the moment, the newness of this honesty between them. "Your mom told me she called you," he said. She's processing everything." Ethan nodded, picking at a loose thread on the couch. "She sounded okay. Hurt, but okay. She said you two talked." "Yeah," Daniel said, his voice soft. "I told her everything. About why I lied. Why I was scared. I'm trying to make it right." Ethan looked at him, his eyes searching. You really mean it, don't you? All this proud stuff. Daniel leaned forward, his hands clasped. More than anything, you're my son, Ethan. I love you, and I'm sorry it took me so long to say it. Ethan's eyes glistened, and he looked away, blinking rapidly. It's okay, Dad. I mean, it's not. But I get it. It's hard. You know, being different in a place like this. Daniel nodded, his chest tight. I know, and I should have been there to help you through it. But I'm here now. Ethan smiled, small but genuine. Yeah, you are. They talked for hours. About Ethan's job, his friends, the guy he'd been seeing but hadn't told anyone about yet. Daniel listened, really listened, for the first time in years. And as the sun set, casting golden light through the window, he felt something shift, a new beginning. Fragile but real. Weeks passed, and the air in the house slowly began to lighten. Margaret and Daniel talked more, not just about Ethan, but about themselves, their fears, their hopes. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of tension, of hurt surfacing like bruises, but they were trying. Daniel made a point to call Ethan every few days, checking in, asking about his life. Each conversation felt like a brick in the foundation they were rebuilding. One evening, Ethan invited them to a small art gallery event where his designs were being showcased. Daniel felt a surge of pride as he and Margaret dressed for the occasion. Her in a navy dress, him in a blazer Ethan had helped him pick out at the boutique. The memory of that night in the fitting room lingered, a turning point he'd never forget. The gallery was a cozy space in the heart of the city, filled with vibrant paintings and sculptures, the air buzzing with chatter and clinking glasses. Ethan stood near a display of his work, his flannel shirt swapped for a sharp button-down, his smile wide as he greeted guests. When he saw Daniel and Margaret, his face lit up, and he waved them over. You made it, Ethan said, pulling them both into a hug. Daniel felt the warmth of it, the ease that hadn't been there before. Wouldn't miss it, Margaret said, her eyes shining as she looked at Ethan's designs, bold, colorful posters that captured the energy of the city. These are incredible, sweetheart. Ethan blushed, rubbing the back of his neck. Thanks, Mom. Means a lot. Daniel studied the posters, each one a piece of his son's heart. You've got a real gift, Ethan, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so proud of you. Ethan's eyes met his, and for a moment, the crowded gallery faded away. Thanks, Dad, he said softly. That still means a lot. As the evening wore on, Daniel watched Ethan move through the crowd, confident and at ease. He saw glimpses of the boy he'd raised, but also the man he'd become, strong, creative, unafraid. Margaret slipped her hand into his, squeezing gently, and Daniel knew she saw it too. Later, as they stood by a sculpture of twisted metal, Margaret leaned close. You did good, Daniel, she whispered. With him. With us. He squeezed her hand back, his heart full. We did good. When the event ended, Ethan walked them to their car, the night air cool and crisp. You guys should come by the apartment sometime, he said, his voice casual but hopeful. Maybe meet Jamie. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Jamie. Ethan grinned, a little shy. Yeah, the guy I told you about. He's pretty great. Margaret smiled, pulling Ethan into another hug. We'd love to meet him. Right, Daniel? Absolutely, Daniel said, his voice steady. Anytime, kid. As they drove home, the city lights blurring past, Daniel felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The lies were gone, replaced by something stronger: truth, love, and the promise of a family made whole. He glanced at Margaret, her profile soft in the glow of the dashboard, and knew they'd get through this. Together. Months later, the coastal town felt different to Daniel, not smaller, but warmer. as if the weight of his secrets had lifted from the streets themselves. He and Margaret had started hosting Sunday dinners, inviting Ethan and Jamie, whose quiet humor and kind eyes had quickly won them over. The house was filled with laughter again, the kind that spilled out onto the porch and lingered in the air. One Sunday, as the four of them sat around the table, plates piled with Margaret's lasagna, Daniel caught Ethan's eye. His son was laughing at something Jamie had said, his hand resting lightly on Jamie's arm. The sight filled Daniel with a quiet joy, a certainty that he'd done something right, even if it had taken years to get there. After dinner, as Margaret and Jamie cleared the table, Daniel and Ethan stepped onto the porch, the evening air cool against their skin. The ocean was a distant murmur, a steady rhythm that grounded them. "You okay, Dad?" Ethan asked, leaning against the railing. Daniel nodded, his hands in his pockets. "More than okay. I'm happy. Really happy." Ethan smiled, his eyes reflecting the porch light. "Good. You deserve it." Daniel shook his head, a soft laugh escaping him. "I don't know about that. But I'm grateful. For you. For your mom. For this." Ethan's expression softened, and he bumped his shoulder against Daniel's, just like he had that night on the boardwalk. "I'm glad you told me, Dad." That night in the fitting room, it changed everything. Daniel's throat tightened, and he looked out at the darkening sky, the stars just beginning to show. "I should have done it sooner, but I'm glad I did it at all." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the past present but not heavy. Daniel thought of the lies he'd told, the years he'd spent hiding, and the moment he'd dropped to his knees in that fitting room, desperate to make things right. It hadn't been perfect, but it had been honest. And that was enough. As they went back inside, the warmth of the house enveloped them, Margaret's laughter mingling with Jamie's. Daniel looked at his family, his wife, his son, and the man who'd become a part of their lives, and felt a gratitude so deep it ached. He'd lied for years, but the truth had set them free. And for one night, one moment, he'd finally said the words that mattered most. "I'm proud."